In this tutorial, what we're going to do is take a look at the first few stages of soldering together the digital die product. I've actually got a finished one, which is just here. I'm just going to connect that to the power now. I use blue LEDs in mine, and one of the things I will say about that is it does make for a very, very, very bright die. So much so, actually, that when you come to use it, you suddenly find it gives you a bit of a headache after a little while of using it. But essentially what we do is we push and hold the button. I just rolled a 3. I push and hold the button again, I just rolled a 5, and so on. So that's pretty much the way it's going to work once it's all finished. So let's start putting that together. The first thing you need to do once you've got your PCB is to go over to the component racks and grab all the parts you need. I suggest you don't grab everything all at once because that's going to cause you a lot of problems down the line. What I do suggest you do first of all though is go and grab some resistors and probably also grab your diode as well. Now with this particular PCB you'll see it's actually got all the resistor values for most of the parts written on it already. Those are the numbers here. For example, you see it says 220, there's 4 of those, there's another 220 here down at the bottom. What else have we got on here? There's a 10k in the side, that's in there, just there, look. And I think there's a 100k here and a 22k just here. So that sort of indicates whereabouts the different resistors are going to need to know once we're all done. Now I've actually been up already and picked up all my resistors. I've got them just here. Okay, they're just off the shot, but you can possibly make those out down there. So let's get started. What I'm going to do then first is I'm going to grab one of my resistors, doesn't matter which one, and identify which one it is. So this resistor I've got here in my hand, this is, it's got a red stripe, and an orange stripe, then the gold on the end. So red is a 2, so that's 2, the second one's red as well, so that's another 2, and then the orange on the end indicates 3 zeros need to go after that, so 22000, so that's 22,000 or 22k. So based on the fact that on my PCB just here I've got 22k just here, I know that I need to poke that through this hole. No, not quite, let's try that again. Through this hole and through this hole just here as well on the opposite side of it. Okay, so that when I look now where it says 22k on the board, I've got that sticking out the 2 holes. What I'm also going to do now is take the individual legs of the components and I'm going to sort of fan those out to about 45 degrees each, like so, so that this way when I let go of it, the resistor doesn't sort of try and drop away, it doesn't fall anywhere, so they're sort of sticking up in the air. A lot of people get really tempted at this point to lay them down flat like this. Okay, if you do that and you lay them down flat, you're going to hit a whole bunch of problems down the line in this project, so please don't do that because you'll end up with solder sort of flowing across those components. Alright, so there we go, looking like that. So let's just quickly solder in one of these. Now hopefully by now you should be pretty good at soldering already, but we'll just quickly remind ourselves the basic technique. What we do is we make sure we've got our solder first of all in one hand. Okay, we just sort of take out a little bit like that. I've got about 6 or 7 centimeters there, and we take our soldering iron. Now I've only just turned this one on, so the first thing I'm going to need to do is to tin the tip. But of course before we even get into any of that, we need to remember that health and safety is of course paramount. So I'm going to take my time to get my safety goggles and to put those on, which I'm doing now. Much better. Okay, so to solder something, like I was saying, we need to start by tinning the tip. So I do that by just feeding a small amount of solder onto the soldering iron, like I've done just there. That'll smoke plenty, and then just wiping that off onto the sponge. And that's going to be that nice, shiny, clean tip edge that I've got just here, like so. So that's ready to work. What I'm then going to be doing is taking that soldering iron, holding it nice and vertically. Okay, I'm going to place that so that it's touching both the pad on the PCB and also the leg of the component. I'm then going to count to 3. Feed in some solder, take the solder away, and take the soldering iron away. And I'm trying to leave it so that once it's finished, I've got a sort of a tent kind of look, like I'm doing my fingers here, so that it's kind of going up, like so, rather than like a big bulbous ball of solder. Let's try one, and we'll see if we can make it work. So, in we go. So soldering iron going in, getting that nice and steady, soldering iron's nice and vertical. That was me having counted to more than 3, I should think, just then. Feeding in a little bit of solder, and then slowly taking the soldering iron away. Now I can still see the hole that I drilled, which means that that's what we call a dry joint at the moment. So I need to get back in there, I need to feed in some more solder, and then to take that away, and let's have a look at how I did on there. Okay, now this isn't an ideal soldered join, okay, because it's kind of like a little ball that's sitting on top. I actually wonder if with the soldering iron I've picked up, if the head on there is a little bit dirty, and that's leading to that not flowing, the solder not flowing onto the board very nicely. So if that continues to happen, I'm actually going to change the soldering iron. Or what I could do instead, if you do get that a lot, is you can get these wire brushes like I've got just here, and you can take your soldering iron and you can give that a good old scrub to try and get it to be a little bit more clean and shiny. Okay, that's looking slightly better. So I've got to confess, this isn't the best one I've ever seen. Okay, let's solder that other leg on and see how that looks. So again, coming back in now, soldering iron going in, touching that in place, so it's touching the pad and the component leg, counting to 3, and then feeding the solder in down at the bottom, and then slowly taking the soldering iron away. Okay, so that one's actually somewhat better this time. Okay, so I'm just going to hold that up to the camera just so you can see it. Okay, and that's sitting there quite nicely. I can then come back in with the side cutter, getting quite close, and snip that end off like so. Alright, so you can do exactly that for all the resistors. Okay, I'm just going to do one more before I leave it, which is the diode, which is this component just here. Now with the diode, what you'll see is it's sort of like a black kind of rectangle with a grey end on it, which is up this side here. That grey end's a bit like an arrowhead, and that's pointing the direction that current is allowed to flow, so it's allowed to flow through the component this way. On my PCB, you'll see that I've actually put a little picture of an arrow, and that's just over here on this side. You see that? It's just there. And you can see the arrows pointing upwards. So current is designed to flow that way through the PCB. So I'm going to put my diode in the 2 holes, like so. You'll notice the diode wire is a bit stiffer than a resistor. It's actually got the thickest wire of all the components, and that's because diodes are designed to carry quite a bit of current. If you decide that it doesn't want to go in just with your fingers, get in there with long nose pliers like I've got just here, just grip it gently and pull it through just to get it to sit nice and flat on your board like this one's going to in just a second. Something a little bit more like that. You can also pinch gently like this as well, look, to encourage it to sit down flat. So again, that's sitting flat against your board. Once it's on, same thing as before, fan the legs out to 45 degrees, so they're sitting up like nicely like that. Put it in the clamp, and then solder in using the standard techniques. So soldering iron's getting right in there. Give that a little bit longer than usual to hot up. I'm going to count to maybe 5 on this one before I feed the solder in. Let's get that in there. That's gone on quite nicely. And this one. Okay, that's again gone on quite nicely as well. Yeah, they've soldered on pretty good. And then come back in just like before, just stab myself in the finger with a side cutter. Back in there, snip, and snip, and so on. So we're well on our way now to getting this soldered together. I've just actually noticed that my resistor that I've got just here has lifted slightly off the board. There's a little gap under here. I can get my fingernail under here if I wanted to. It's ideal and much better if all your components sit flat on the board. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to pinch and hold this very, very gently in my long nose pliers, like I've done just here. Okay, very, very gently. And all I'm then going to do is get the soldering iron. I'm just going to touch it on each of those soldered points that I've got one at a time. And what will happen is as the solder melts, the component itself will actually sit flatter against the PCB. Okay, and you can see now I've sort of closed that gap, and what I've now got instead is a much, much more flat kind of finish. And again, my component's still soldered on there really nice and neatly. So I'm going to leave you now to solder on the remaining resistors. Okay, like I said, the labels are all there. And then in the next tutorial, what we'll do is we'll take a quick look at what needs to be done next. So I'll see you then.